The Denver Broncos under Sean Payton are finally embracing a rebuild. All these offseason moves have told us that. What does it mean, and can Sean Payton pull it off? We'll break it all down on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, all the everydayers out there who make us your first listen of the day, every single day. You can get Locked On Broncos for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you do us a favor. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe or that follow button down below so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. A Rocky Mountain roller coaster of an offseason to start here as the Broncos now embrace a rebuild. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, look, we did a breaking news episode. We did the reaction to the Justin Simmons release on Thursday here, and it was a big move, right? A big move, a heartbreaking move, a really rough day in Broncos country in the eyes of the fan base, a gut punch, so to speak. But with that said, comes the revelation, like Denver's had to make some moves to become cap compliant. It's not just for a salary cap reason. These are the signs that this team is now finally embracing a rebuild.
It really is. I mean, when you look at some veteran names, obviously the two guys that have already been let go, Russell Wilson, Justin Simmons being let go, the Broncos, as you said, trying to get salary cap compliant, but really this is Sean Payton putting his stamp on the organization, right? And it's not just doing it for the sake of doing it, right? I mean, as we talked about in that breaking news episode with Justin Simmons, like a lot of the moves that we're going to see from the Broncos before the start of free agency, these moves would have been necessary regardless of whether or not Russell Wilson had done well with the team or, like we've seen, didn't do well enough to stick around. And so what we're experiencing right now, Cody, is a rebuild that I think would have been necessary no matter what. And you look at a team like the Buffalo Bills out east, where they're having to really replace a lot of key veterans on their roster. The only benefit that the Buffalo Bills have, which is a significant one over the Denver Broncos, is they can sleep at night knowing that Josh Allen is on the roster, and the Broncos don't have the quarterback position solidified. If the quarterback position is solidified, the rebuild is much easier. It's much more palatable. And we saw them cut guys like Tre'Davious White and Jordan Poyer and Mitch Morse, like really quality players. The Broncos are now having to do the same. The bummer is you don't have the quarterback in place. And that's why I think so many in Broncos country are kind of in a, I'm mad at everybody kind of mode, right? I don't want to be happy with Sean Payton right now or George Payton or anybody. Like, they're tearing down the roster. They're proving that we're going to be going into a season of kind of unknown. It's tough to stomach, but I think it would have been necessary no matter what.
We've been talking about this for various years. You know, my first opportunity getting into this game was for Predominantly Orange right after the Broncos, won the Super Bowl. And my first article over there, Predominantly Orange, was the Broncos, they're not rebuilding, they're retooling, right? And so Denver's taken this retool approach almost every single year, right? Band-Aid solutions, trying to figure out, okay, hey, this is going to be what gets Denver to still be competitive, be in the playoff hunt, the conversation, even after Peyton Manning. It simply hasn't worked, right? And I think for me as well, just the realization here for the Broncos, and this might have been a really huge development here for Sean Payton specifically. I don't think Sean Payton came to Denver to rebuild, but after going through last season and knowing like, hey, we've got all these things coming up, if Sean himself was like, there's no way that Russell Wilson could be the quarterback that I'm going to achieve what I want to achieve with, Sean Payton, earlier this week, he and George Payton had a meeting with Broncos ownership. It was on Tuesday or Wednesday. Part of me wonders, in that meeting, did something change where Sean's like, look, I know I didn't come to sign up for a rebuild, but if we're going to do this the right way, we are going to have to do these things, and we're going to have to embrace a rebuild. Has he created maybe a little bit more of a landing room for him, like to extend the runway for Sean Payton, who's got 4 years left on his contract? Sean came here to win now, but obviously I think there's the realization that wasn't going to happen. And now you mentioned it. You don't have the quarterback right now. Can you get there with a young guy? This is where I think the question kind of changes. Did the vision for Sean Payton change? Did he approach ownership and say, hey, our vision has to be entirely different now going forward?
I can't help but wonder, Cody, if maybe the vision, maybe the perception of the vision from Sean Payton's perspective was wrong all along. I mean, I think a lot of us, myself included, assumed that he's going to get back into the coaching world at the age of 60, and he's going to want to go to the place where he can most quickly get a Super Bowl win and become the first head coach in NFL history to win with multiple different teams. Maybe it's always been the long game for him. And I think that when you took a team over like the Denver Broncos, Sean Payton really did inherit a similar situation to what he left in New Orleans, didn't he? A lot of people thought that, man, Sean Payton quit on the New Orleans Saints. He didn't want to have to deal with the salary cap mess out there. He didn't want to have to deal with post Drew Brees. Well, now we're seeing that Sean Payton took on a job in Denver where it's a very similar situation, if not a little bit worse, right? And certainly I think Cody, he loves the game. We can see that. We can tell that from the way that he talks. He doesn't look like he's lacking energy. He doesn't look like he's lacking any sort of confidence in the way that he speaks, in the way that they're making moves. Obviously, maybe there has always been, like you said, this longer term vision in place for Sean Payton. The runway, maybe he's not pivoting to extend the runway. Maybe this has always been in the cards for him. He looked at the Broncos roster when he came in and he gave an honest assessment and said, here's what we're going to have to do year 1, year 2, year 3. It might get worse before it gets better. Or maybe you bring in a guy like Cody Roark, who was previously with the New Orleans Saints front office, and you bring that guy in and you say, give me an honest assessment of what you would do to this roster right now. And maybe he came in with those fresh eyes and said, you got to move on from Russ. You got to move on from Justin Simmons and this, that. I'm not saying he's pulling the strings, but sometimes, Cody, those fresh eyes, when you get put on something, it can change your course. So to me, I feel like maybe we've underestimated the amount of time that Sean Payton wanted to put into this Denver Broncos franchise, thinking that, well, he wants to get to the Super Bowl as quickly as possible. Maybe it's more so he really wanted to establish his legacy over time.
I'm very curious to see how it all plays out. This is something that I plan to ask Sean next month in his pre-draft meeting. I mean, I'm sure we're going to have a Zoom conference call with him and George Payton in the build-up to the NFL draft. That's definitely something I'll have at the forefront of my mind here. I wanted to bring up something else here before we obviously pivot into what is the vision for 2024. I've had a lot of Broncos fans reach out to me, and there's a lot of frustration, like especially season ticket holders, because of all the moves that have happened, right? And now if we're actually approaching the conversation where Denver's actually rebuilding, let's say that they are, Broncos fans are not happy that, once again, season ticket prices have increased, some by 7%, some by 13%, depending on where they sit there. And it just goes back to, like, when Pat Bowlen was in control, when Denver was rough, when they were struggling, there were times where he froze, cost increases on season tickets. To me, what is this? Like, what is the ownership's vision about this? Because fans are not going to tolerate and sit back and just embrace just losing. Like, they're overwhelmed with it. They're sick of it, and rightfully so. I think this is definitely something to bring forth. So, Broncos Country, if you also have this experience, hey, let us know. If you're watching here on Locked On Broncos, wherever you get your podcasts, are available on YouTube. But what is the vision for 2024? Could it be a rookie quarterback and a bunch of young guys around him? That very well may be the case. We'll break it all down here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first. 3% match must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA, available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer.
We hear Denver Broncos head coach Sean Payton talk about vision all the time. Vision for players, vision for the franchise, the organization. But what is the vision as of the release of Justin Simmons, Russell Wilson? Cody's got clear vision. And look, I think this is going to be one of the most fascinating off seasons in franchise history, but we won't know fully what the vision is until the draft and free agency. Cody and I are going to break down exactly what that could be on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And thank you so much to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube, where, throughout the course of the offseason, Cody and I, we're going to be popping up just about every single day. I feel, Cody, we know the Broncos, they're always going to be making moves, always going to be making changes, especially now that we've entered into a season of rebuilding, embracing the unknown, going to be a ton of new player personnel. We've already seen Sean Payton willing to cut Russell Wilson, cut Justin Simmons. I mean, that it doesn't get any more difficult than that. The biggest dead cap money number in NFL history, and arguably cutting your best player over the last 8 years. He's already gone that way. What do those moves say to you about the Denver Broncos 2024 vision?
Well, we talked a lot about a rebuild, right? And if it's truly a rebuild, do you rebuild with the stopgap option at quarterback? I don't think that's the case, right? You rebuild with a young guy. And we talk about this year's quarterback class in the upcoming NFL draft. And there are so many different players, right? And the consensus on every single player is different. You're going to get different draft analysts' thoughts on it, scouts' thoughts on certain players, who's the best fit for Sean Payton and vice versa. And then you have our opinions, then you have the fan base's opinions and preferences on who they would like. Ultimately, to me, the vision for 2024, Sayre, if Denver is truly rebuilding, I'm going to plant my flag right here, and I'm going to say it firmly. It has to be with a rookie quarterback, your 12th overall pick, or if you want to move up a couple of spots, whatever it may be. It has to be a young quarterback, and you build around him, right? And that may also include that, hey, this rookie quarterback, he's got Quinn Miners next to him, right? He's going to obviously be there. You're going to probably have a second-year center or a guy who hasn't played an NFL snap at center just yet, either between Alex Forsyth or Luke Wattenberg at that position. You have Mike McGlinchey, a veteran guy coming back who obviously has a lot of pressure to perform even better this upcoming season. And then at left guard, you got Ben Powers, one of your other key offseason acquisitions last year in free agency. And then right now, tackle. I mean, it could change. Could be Garrett Bowles, in my opinion. I thought our good friend Andrew Mason made a great point that I saw on Twitter. If you are going to rebuild and get a young quarterback, you need to have a guy like Garrett Bowles there. Garrett Bowles probably makes the most sense right now in terms of being extended on this Broncos roster. That could have changed either before we recorded this episode or after we recorded this episode. That's how this game works sometimes. But you have to go with a rookie quarterback, and you're more than likely going to have a bunch of young guys around. We've already heard Sean talk about Marvin Mims is going to have a bigger role for the team next season. They're very high on Brandon Johnson. You may have Jerry Jeudy still in the fold here. And look, Cortland may or may not be back with Denver in 2024. He could also be another guy that they choose to move forward from. And maybe, I don't know, like some old faces that Sean Payton is familiar with. We know that Michael Thomas is expected to be cut. I know if that were a move, it wouldn't be popular in the eyes of Broncos country, but that might be a move that Sean's willing to make himself. It doesn't matter what we think. So for me, it's like, all right, you're going to go with a young guy and a bunch of young pieces around him on offense. You and I talked about this as well. In free agency, go and sign defensive depth players, fill a couple of spots. The NFL draft, why not go all offense with all of your picks?
I agree. I would love to see that. I mean, I love when teams like the Denver Broncos in their situation, when teams really just load up and say, we're gonna get better at this one area of the team, regardless of how the overall record looks. Like, we're gonna show improvement here. I like seeing those kinds of things, Cody. But while you say you're all in on, hey, draft a rookie quarterback, get that guy in the building, move forward, I'm of the opinion that this offseason needs to be all about, hey, we're going to Costco. We're going to Sam's Club. What do I mean by that? We're bulk buying. We're going to go after the best possible values that we can at every position group. And I think that the Broncos need to look into reclamation projects all over the roster. Maybe they make a big splash here or there, like at running back, tight end, like we've discussed previously. But I think you need to look at who are some of the most talented guys in free agency that maybe have not had a great situation, that maybe have had injuries, or who have had poor coaching that we believe we can get the best out of. That's why I wouldn't rule out a Sam Darnold type of situation. I would love to see a reclamation project like that brought in and say, we don't get our guy in the draft. We've got Sam Darnold and Jarrett Stidham, and at least there's some youth there, like you talked about, that we could maybe just at least take a shot, take a flyer on a guy. How about on the defensive side? We've mentioned names like Jeff Okudah, CJ Henderson, former first-round picks, former top 10 picks. hitting free agency this year who could be value in free agency. Safety position, we just lost Justin Simmons. Why not bring in somebody like Darnell Savage, Jeremy Chin, former first and second round draft picks who haven't worked out at their previous spots? I want to see that. Remember, Cody, when the Broncos went after a bunch of former Cleveland Browns players, they called them the Broncos on the defensive line. You had former number 1 overall pick Courtney Brown, former number 3 pick Gerard Warren, a bunch of other guys who were high draft selections, and they kind of just combined to make this really good defensive line, at least for a couple of years in Denver. One of the best defenses this team has ever had back in 2005. I would love to see the Broncos take a similar approach this offseason, take some risks on talented guys. If you're going to be rebuilding, what's the point of, like we've talked about, these Band-Aid solutions in free agency? Don't be signing the Kyle Fullers and the Ronald Darby types. Go after guys who have had a bad shake, who might give you a really good price to get an opportunity to start, and get those guys in the building. Let your coaching do the talking.
So you can do that. And there's another opportunity that I think is present here, right? You mentioned like Justin Simmons, household name, face of the franchise. Patrick Surtain more likely going to become that guy. Will he even want to sign an extension with Denver now? It is an entirely different episode down the road here. We won't even entertain that right now. Something to think about for the future, though, Broncos country. But you also have a lot of other younger players on this team on offense and defense. It is an opportunity for 2024 for those guys to begin to establish themselves as potential household names for your franchise. And you want that, right? Look, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of unknowns about the direction of this team. I think you and I are in agreement. This does signify rebuild. And I think Broncos country, for the most part, like, while they're upset about Justin Simmons being gone, I do think a large portion of the fan base and some of the replies and some of the comments that we've gotten here on Locked On Broncos have indicated that it's about time that they embrace a rebuild. Now, I think when Sean's pressed on it and is asked, like, are you truly rebuilding? I'm very curious to see what he's going to say, because if he says, no, I don't believe in rebuilding, like, the reality of the situation is, when you look at where Denver's at financially, you look at the moves that they've made, this screams from the rooftops, rebuild. What does that look like? And is that maybe a deflection on behalf of Payton? There's a lot riding on the stakes this offseason here for the Broncos. And look, there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. So can the Broncos, with new faces we anticipate to be in the fold here in 2024, can the Broncos still compete? If we draw a comparison to the Houston Texans, there might be a really good opportunity to invest further into this theory. And we'll break it all down here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And you don't have to deal with any frustrating ticket buying experiences any longer, because the Game Time app alleviates a lot of the concerns. If you've ever wanted to see what the view from your seat is going to be for the event that you plan on attending, whether that's a basketball game, a soccer match, a concert, or even a comedy show, Game Time gives you the assurance of being able to see what your vantage point will look like when you attend the event based on where your seat is at. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events that are going on near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsor deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. With Zone Deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big time savings. And the Game Time guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. If you find the tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Can the Broncos still compete in 2024, even if the idea is rebuild? With all these new faces around them, can the Broncos still find a way to be competitive? That's an interesting question, and one that's going to probably generate a lot of not so sure responses from Broncos country, rightfully so, but we're going to break it down here on today's episode. Real quick, I want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country. Thank you so much for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Every single day, you'll always have a brand new episode every single weekday. And then when there's breaking news or anything crazy that happens, you can get a bonus episode on the Locked On Broncos feed, wherever you get your podcasts, or available on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe or follow so you never miss out on objective, fresh, up-to-date coverage of all things Orange and blue. Here's the question, $1 million question for everyone that's watching or listening here, Locked On Broncos today. And Sayre, I'm going to open up with you. Can the Broncos still compete in 2024 with new faces if they are rebuilding?
I think they can, Cody. I've honestly never been more confident that Sean Payton is going to be able to figure this out. And you know me, if you've been listening to this podcast, I have planted my flag, as you said earlier, Cody, it firmly in the Sean Payton camp. I'm trusting what he's doing. I think that there's a real misconception among Broncos country right now based on the moves that are happening that Sean Payton is essentially a second coming of Josh McDaniels. That's the vibe that I'm getting when I read Twitter and when I see the discussions that are happening, that Sean Payton is dismantling this roster that was so good. But remember, Josh McDaniels dismantled, he had Pro Bowl players on his offense that he just alienated and traded away. The future of the organization. We're not talking about a similar situation in Denver. We're talking about aging players who are at the end of their contracts, not Pro Bowl players who you want to build around going forward that are in their 20s, their early to mid 20s. This is totally different situation. It's not a power trip from Sean Payton, Cody, and I've never been more confident seeing that he's confident enough to cut Russell Wilson, to cut Justin Simmons, to make these decisions after saying that last year's team should have been a playoff team, after hearing the ownership say, hey, we want to be better than we were this past season. And the Broncos won eight games last year. I've never been more confident that he has a plan going forward, that this team is going to be able to be competitive. I don't know that they're going to be Super Bowl contenders in 2024, but I think they're going to be competitive, to say the least.
You and I were talking before we even started doing this show here today that, think about all the moves that the Broncos have made over the course of the years of you and I doing this show, right? And in theory, we look at the moves like, okay, hey, that's going to make the Broncos better. Like the Broncos are going to have a chance to win games. There are a lot of unpopular decisions that have been made here by Sean Payton and the Broncos, right? And I think the common consensus is the team's going in the wrong direction from that. Maybe this is where it flips around, right? Maybe this is where the Broncos turn it around. And I'll tell you this, asking Broncos country right now, especially like in the emotional side of it, which is so understanding, like this is a fan base that is so fed up. They are sick and tired of losing. They're sick and tired of being a laughing stock by other fan bases when something happens. Like everyone's hoping and watching and waiting to see if the Broncos just crash and burn. Fans are tired of it, and I understand that. However, what if this does work out, right? What if the vision that Sean Payton and George Payton are trying to put forth, what if it works out? Not saying right away in 2024. Let's say maybe 2025 is a situation here. I made the comparison a little bit earlier to the Houston Texans, right? Sayre, last year when they were going into the NFL draft, did you expect or did you have any notion that they were going to be competitive in 2023 in any way, shape, or form? I didn't. I certainly did not. How did you feel about that? Because they got CJ Stroud. They got Will Anderson Jr. I was like, oh, those are great pieces for a first-year head coach in DeMeco Ryans. They're going to be building for the future, right? I did not expect him to compete right away. That doesn't mean that Denver can't do the same exact thing, even though like what they did last year in Houston could be an anomaly. The NFL, we see it every year. It changes. The Broncos could be the next anomaly here in the situation. And hopefully that is the case for Broncos country.
Absolutely. I think you make a great point. Look, just over a year ago, before Houston even hired DeMeco Ryans, don't you remember there were reports and rumors out there that DeMeco didn't even want to interview for that job because of the situation that he had previously there as a player? There was that franchise was embarrassing. I mean, they were in an embarrassing position as of the whole Deshaun Watson situation, letting him sit out for a year. Remember, Bill O'Brien was just absolutely crushed for trading DeAndre Hopkins for basically nothing. Like they were in such an embarrassing spot. And I remember, Cody, the 2021 NFL draft, where they didn't even have a first or second round draft choice. And then in round 3, they take Davis Mills, right? And everybody's like, what is the Texans' plan here? What are they even doing? Like, what is their situation? They just continually took shot after shot in free agency. They built up their NFL draft capital, and they struck when the iron was hot. They took CJ Stroud, got a little bit lucky to be able to get him over Carolina last year, who took Bryce Young with the #1 pick. I think, Cody, to me, like you said it, there are anomalies every year in the NFL. And I'm not saying that's what's going to take for the Broncos to become relevant again, but look, you get the right QB in place. Let's just boil it down to that. You get the right QB in place, man, everything on your entire roster changes. It raises all boats. It makes everybody, you get addicted to winning. You get addicted to this idea that, wow, we've got the guy of the future. It makes everybody better. I think the Broncos could be in that position, depending obviously what happens in the NFL draft.
And if you do somehow find that QB and there are steps taken forward, it could make Denver a free agency destination. But there's so much, right? That has to, it seems like when you look at the list of things that they have to do, it almost seems like you ever watch John Wick. They always talk about the impossible task, right? Seems like that's where the Broncos are at right now, but it changes every year. The teams that we expect to be terrible going into a season sometimes surprise us and become a huge turnaround team that ends up winning their division, right? And look, Denver made drastic strides last year after the 1-5 start. They were able to get out of that hole there. And the question is there something that Sean Payton and George Payton and the ownership group have seen that even without Justin Simmons, even without Russell Wilson, even potentially without some other names that could come up here, and the Broncos get back to that and maybe turn a couple of those losses that they had into wins? And it's the difference between missing the postseason and being in the postseason. I mean, there's so much at stake when we talk about it. I just feel like this is going to be something that takes time, right? And look, Broncos country, and I'm going to say it here, if Denver is embracing a rebuild, I know it's hard. I know it's hard to ask for patience. I have no idea how things are going to turn out. Sayre has no idea how things are going to turn out. And quite frankly, we all know that you guys as a fan base have no idea how things are going to turn out. It's easy right now, I think, to look at everything that has gone on this offseason and just to feel like there is no direction for this team. I think that's a very valid feeling. That's a very valid point that everybody can acknowledge here. We could also be very surprised 6-7 months down the road from now, right? And, you know, the woulda, coulda, shoulda game is fun. And in theory, we're just going to have to let things play out. And I guarantee you, as every move happens for the Broncos, whether that be NFL free agency, whether that be the NFL draft, as the team gets back to mini camp and OTAs in May, we're going to dive deep into almost every angle possible with this team to see, like, what is the vision? What can the team do with what they have? Even though on paper in some areas, it doesn't seem very confidence providing there. But I mean, Sayre, I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be a very, very, what is the term we said? Rocky Mountain roller coaster. I think the Rocky Mountain roller coaster is going to continue his ride, but there's got to be some thrills part of the roller coaster ride, right?
Yeah, there's got to be some unknowns, some twists and turns and corners that come up that you're like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. I think, look, the supreme confidence that I have in Sean Payton comes from a history of being able to build great teams throughout different eras of the NFL. I mean, in the mid to late 2000s, he built a great team. From the 2010 to 2020, he built a great team. And those are different eras of football. Everything is constantly changing, constantly evolving. You're having to replace star players on your roster year over year. The fact that he's done this before leads me to believe that he can do it again, Cody. And I believe that Sean Payton is one of the best coaches in NFL history. And I think he has one of the best eyes for NFL talent. I know that there's so many split opinions about him, his personality, things like that. And I'm not trying to drive any sort of narrative to force people to believe anything. You could think whatever you want about Sean Payton. I just have supreme confidence. What did they used to say? Let Russ cook. Let's let Sean cook this offseason and see what he's got planned. The vision of this team is in good hands, in my opinion.
Well, Broncos country, the only thing we can do is sit back, wait to see you react, and bring analysis to everything that comes forth here in Broncos country. Make sure you let us know what you thought about today's episode, Locked On Broncos, wherever you listen or wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate you so much. The NFL, the new league year, is going to begin next week, and certainly there are going to be a wide variety of different moves that the Broncos do, in fact, make. We'll keep you covered every step of the way here on Locked On Broncos. We'll see you next time for a brand new episode of the show.